the mighty Ncase M2. I'll show you how to assemble and build in this one for a little 1440p destroyer. Welcome to Machines More. Did a review of the Ncase M2. Hope you were able to check it out. The assembly and build process, it's a little bit more detailed, so that's what we're going to cover today. So the first thing I will do is talk about putting the case itself together for the standard or upright mode. And then we'll go ahead and do a build with the 7800X 3D and the 4070 Super in it. Then we'll come back and I'll show you a quick thermal comparison for this upright mode to show you why my fan configuration recommendation is what it is. Before we begin, let's talk about the main parts so you're familiar with them before we assemble. This is the rear panel of the case. This is where your GPU is going to hang in a upright or a inverted setup. We can actually take this off for now because we're going to need this off in order to assemble the case. You can attach this piece right here. And that's what the GPU attaches to, and just set those screws aside. A couple things about the rear panel. Okay, so you have this badge. I've got it upside down. I'm going to flip it over. We're doing an upright build today. You can move this here or here, and your power plug can also sit here as well. So you kind of have a freedom based on where you want that, where's most convenient for your setup. This is the front panel for the case. And your I/O will slot right here. And let's just talk about the I/O. The I/O is going to be pieced together like this when you get it. Now, actually, based on the timing of production, you may actually see something slightly different, but it's the same idea. It's just going to attach at the front here. This is your main board panel. It's a unibody design. I have standoffs here because I've already used this in my initial review of the case. It's set up for mATX right now. So if you are doing a mini-itx build, your standoff position will not be the same. It's actually not going to come with the standoffs installed right now. But based on what I understand, the future revision of this case, or perhaps even one of the current production models, they will have standoff locations marked out for your mATX board. So look forward to that. Hopefully that it's going to happen. But this, you're going to notice this side has the machining. Okay. So this is the outboard side. And you'll want the flat side facing inside of your case. This is the bottom panel. And mine has the round rubber feet at the bottom. Of course, you can option on the classic style M1 feet, which are the angled, chunkier pieces that'll elevate your case a little bit more off the work surface, and that makes bottom fans a little bit more effective. But we'll just keep with this for the upright build I'm going to show you today. It's we're going to let the GPU do the work of pulling air through the mostly the side panel. One thing you'll notice is that for the most part, the bottom is symmetrical this way, except these here, and that's actually for a vertical GPU foot. So if you are doing a vertical GPU setup, it's important that you have this side on the motherboard side. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. And this is the top panel. The top panel is something you'll slot in at the very end, because this is going to cap off your side panels. And so we can really just set aside this one until the very end of your build, but I'm going to show you what everything looks like to begin with. Radiator panel here. Yours is probably going to look different. Mine's an earlier production or kind of a prototype version here. And so the idea is the same though. You're going to have fans attached to it if you need. This is the side panel of the case. You get two of these. They'll insert into the bottom panel. Okay. And then your top panel will just slide over it. And we'll see that shortly when we assemble it. The fasteners for the case are greatly simplified compared to the M1 Evo. You really just put together the case with this one M3 by 5 screw. Okay, and then you have two of these thumb screws that we'll use at the end to attach the top panel. That's it. Pretty simple. We will start the build with the main board panel. I've got most of my standoffs attached already for the mATX board that I'm using. So I'm going to show you how to put in one more. You're going to need one right here. And to do that, grab your standoff and one of those screws, and we'll start by threading it through. Now you're not going to, I mean, even if you don't have a standoff tool, you can start turning it, and then you'll see the standoff start turning, right? So the janky way to do it is if you want to take some pliers, there is a specific tool you can use, but this is an actual tool to do that. And so what you'll do is the socket will go in and you'll just hold that in place and tighten it down. Okay. And so I'll hold this here so you can reference the mATX standoff positions if you're doing that board. First thing we'll do here after setting up the main board panel, we'll go ahead and attach the main board panel to the rear panel. To do that, we'll stand it up on its upright like this, and we'll take 3 of the screws and just thread them through. That'll look like this. For your front panel out of the box, it may be set up for inverted mode, and just make sure that if you're going to use the rad panel or the fan panel on the side, that you go ahead and put it on this side for the upright build. Okay, pretty simple. You just take 2 of these, unscrew them, and you can swap them to either side. You can also do the inverted build later on if you want. You could do the same thing with this. Now you have a little bit more structure to it, so this should be a little bit simpler. Same thing. Take another 3 screws here. Come on, 2, 3. At this point, your case is starting to look like a case. Rear, middle, front. What I'm going to do is finish building the case, even though we're actually not going to be assembling it this way. I'm actually going to leave the top and bottom off for the assembly just to make it simpler. We'll do the bottom panel. Again, just as a formality, even though I'm not doing vertical GP build, I'm going to leave these drilled holes over here. And you'll take 4 screws and just pop one in each of these 4 corner holes. Okay. If you got one radiator or fan panel, then you'll have to choose whether you want to put that here on the side, which would be good if you're doing a side mounted AIO, or you can do it at the top. So if you want to do top exhausts, that can be helpful. I'm going to go ahead and use 2 of these. Now again, this radiator panel is going to be a little bit different than what you actually receive. Okay. So what we can do, and I'll show you how this mounts up at the top. You don't need to use every single hole here. Okay. One thing to note is that your power supply is actually going to sit under here like this. So in our actual assembly, you would want to do this first before you put this on, just because you wouldn't be able to screw through the top here, but I'm showing you the case overview first. And so with the rad panel on, you would then pop these side panels in these slots here. Okay. There's 2 little tabs on the front of this top panel. You need to make sure that it sits squarely inside the front panel here. A little bit tricky sometimes. Okay, once that's inserted fully, and you make sure that it's going to close down on top of all the side panels without any interference, then you would just close it up with the 2 thumb screws at the back. So this is what the case would look like when it's all assembled. Here's what the case looks like with the side panel off in our upright configuration. So to build in this case, we're actually going to hit rewind. Don't do these steps if you're just building in it. I don't think it would make too much sense to put it all together and then just to take it apart. Just don't install the bottom panel or the rad plate at the top just yet. Okay, and set these side panels aside. So to start the build, we'll just have our rear panel, front panel, and our mainboard panel installed with the standoffs prepped for whichever motherboard you're doing. Here I'm doing an mATX board. This is the B650M Gigabyte. And if you're unfamiliar with installing the CPU, and I'll just show you how this goes in. Okay, just drop it in. This is the 7800X 3D, one of the best gaming CPUs right now. You just put this frame down. We'll read Ryzen right side up and just put that lever down. What I'm gonna do is set up our cooler hardware first for the thermal right cooler. And to set up the cooler hardware, we're gonna do this first. 4 thumb screws. We are gonna tighten it with a screwdriver though. Just get it started. Your board will probably have the stock cooler hardware for stock AM5 coolers. Just take that off first. And just set that aside in the box. You switch up your cooling. Maybe one day you'll need that for an AIO or something like that. All right, we're not going to mount the cooler yet just because it's going to be a little bit difficult to work around. What we can do right now is put in our RAM. For this board, slot 2 and 4. If we're just doing 2 sticks, which that's what we're doing. For our mostly black build today, instead of Kingston Fury, the label is going to be on the left side. Install these. Okay, securely installed there. I'm using an M.2 drive here. Yours may look a little different. You have 2 slots here, and just pop that in. It's toolless, and there's a heatsink that'll go over here. We can set up our power supply bracket now. It's a CNC piece that'll go over your. I'm using an SFX power supply. If you're using an ATX one, you're using something a little bit different. 4 screws. We're going to do that all right now. Now, if you're doing an inverted build, actually, what you'll do is then attach this part to the front I/O, but we're doing an upright build today, so we don't have to do that. So just make sure that all 4 screws are tight. And we can go ahead and install this to our case. For the upright build, the most secure position is going to be right up here, adjacent to the top. We will need to back out the screw that's connecting the front panel to the side panel. And that's because it's going to need to be rethreaded in to the power supply bracket. And so we'll insert that here at the front. You really don't need to back it up all the way. It just can be helpful there. And so you just screw these 3 back in. This one will reattach all the way through to the power supply bracket. There's a small hole cut there for it. We're going to insert the screw here. And you can see that's super solid here. It's not rocking or moving anywhere. I've gone ahead and installed the CPU EPS cable. This is a specific reason for that, and I'll show you shortly. You can technically just go ahead and slot in all the cables that you'll need. There's no harm to doing that right now. But we're going to put in that front I/O bracket right now. And I know this is kind of an odd angle to hold the case at. This is really for the camera. Hopefully you can see that. We'll show a different angle. Okay. Go over these real quick. The USB-C header, USB-A header, and then this is your power button and power button LED connector. These all connect to your motherboard. You can go ahead and run the EPS cable, and then we can set our motherboard over it. And then go ahead and just connect up that EPS cable. This will make a little bit more sense. We're gonna, when you see the top panel, but we're gonna have it come around like this. Just make sure it clears this heatsink here. Okay. Plug in our front I/O. That's the USB-C. USB-A cable is going to go like this. Power switch and power LED will attach down here. Power switch is going to be on the right here. And then the one next to it, LED. For the front panel cables, we can go ahead and just run a zip tie here and cinch them all up together. One thing I should mention is that if you are doing the cable underneath, you want to make sure to, when you put the board down, to run it between these two standoffs and kind of loop it around this way. That's going to help with our placement of the top panel for the fans. If you're sure you don't need to route anything else under the motherboard, I would just go ahead and connect up the motherboard screws now, just 8 at each of these standoffs. I've attached my 24-pin cable at the power supply end. You can go ahead and do that. Just connect it to the motherboard. And I also have my 12V HPWR connector for the GPU in the power supply now. We can manage that up later. We'll just cinch up these cables after we figure out how much length we need to give the GPU. Since you have a good idea of the space you need for your components at this point, I would go ahead and pop in the AC power cable. Actually, at this point, since you know it's a mATX build, you probably have to do it this way anyway, and that's with the protrusion facing down. Alternately, and I'll show you the other way, you could have done it this way over here, and then this facing up. I don't think that looks as good. And then you'll just screw that down with 2 of those M3 screws as well. Okay, it's just these 2 screws at the back here. One thing I do want to do is straighten out my badge. Then we can attach this power cable over here. We'll just snake this part of the cable up and around a little bit like that. You don't need to zip tie it, although you certainly could if you really want to manage it that way. So now with all those cables in place, I want to go ahead and run my fan cable. I just want to do a fan splitter at this point, and that's going to come off of this header. And that's just a splitter here that'll allow me to connect 2 fans, which I'll show you after I put in the cooler. Easier to plug this in without the CPU cooler there, so I'm just going to plug in my CPU fan up at this gray header over here. Okay, it's this one over here. You could consider putting on this guard here. That's a one from Noctua that I have. It doesn't have to be. I think there's plenty of similar products out on the market. And then we'll just put a little thermal paste here. We can mount up our cooler. And then we'll thread it down slowly to make sure you're engaging the threads. You can visually check. And we'll tighten these down evenly. Okay, so the cooler is secure. All right, for airflow, you have 2 options, and I'll skip ahead a little bit here just so you're prepared. You do have one option, which is rear intake. That means your cooler is going to take in air this way, and then a side exhaust fan, so the air comes out this way. That's option 1. And you'll set it up like this. The other option is to do a rear exhausting fan. And so we'll set up our fan with the clips like this. and you will combine that with a side intaking fan. Okay, so those are the two best options. I've actually tested quite a few configurations, and those are the two good ones. And I'd say the differences between those two are largely academic. They are very, very similar. So you can choose. I'll show you the results and the benchmark shortly here, but both are just know that both are very good. I'll show you the fan panel setup at the top. Got this rad panel. Again, mine is going to look a little bit different, I believe, compared to the production one you should be getting. And you'll see why I ran the top cable this way. It's to clear this fan over here. It's a top exhaust fan. It's 25 millimeter. Doesn't have to be this Noctua fan. You can see this board actually obstructs having another fan here. So that's one downside of having the mATX board, in addition to losing the motherboard side fans, which we can kind of make up for by doing another side fan here as well. We'll attach one of these to here before we screw it in. There's going to be more attachment points than this for the fan panel than you actually need. I think just need 4. If you have a power supply with an on-off switch, mine doesn't. If you do, make sure you turn it on. This is going to be the time you can access that pretty freely. Fan is connected, and the panel is attached. You do want to make sure it's screwed in tightly. To set up our graphics card, just make sure your rear auxiliary panel and the GPU hanger bracket that's connected like this. And we're actually going to insert the card, and then we're going to place this over it. For this build, going with the 4070 Super. This is the Asus Dual. Not a very large card. Nice big fans. And that's going to run with a good noise profile. Line up the card with the expansion slot, and then we'll just press down. And do want to be careful here because it's not supported yet. This is probably the trickiest part of putting in the GPU, and then because we're going to then place this and then attach the card to that bracket. Just a better angle of that. Take our cable, and that'll slot right in like that. And as mentioned, we want to try to manage those cables up before we cap up the build. All right, so those cables are managed up against that brace here, so it doesn't have too much excess cable here. And the idea is I use this lower Peerless Assassin 120 mini, just so we can get a side panel fan here. So this is the fan panel with the fan attached. You can do either exhaust or intake. I'll show you the results from both, and then you can decide what makes more sense. One little tip, regardless of which fan configuration you try, just leave these fan screws slightly loose so that we can position it perfectly into this slot, because there is this perfect position that it will align with, because you got the power supply here. You don't want to cover too much of the fan. You don't want to touch the cooler, so you don't get any vibration on that. Just a little bit of clearance, and this will slot in there pretty ideally. That's what we'll do. And then you can screw them, tighten them down all the way when you have them in that sweet spot. A few of those screws here. And to close it up, we already saw how to do this. So the 7800X 3D and 4070 Super Combo, that's an excellent one for 1440p gaming. This build here will run about $1,700 US, maybe $1,750 US, depending on what storage you choose. But you'll be able to play any modern title at a high level. For thermals, it's hard to go wrong in this case. So even the worst fan configuration here isn't too bad. But there is an optimal setup. For CPU-only rendering, the rear intake, so taking air in and side exhaust, it's going to be the best. That's pretty streamlined, right? For combined use, such as gaming, that combo is actually very good as well. That and the rear exhaust, so exhausting out the back and intaking through the side, that's also a very good combo. The rear exhaust, side exhaust yields the best GPU temps flat out, but you can get similar GPU temps and drop 5 degrees on the CPU with a side intake fan, so I don't see why you wouldn't do that. For a more gaming-oriented setup, marginally, I would choose the rear exhaust and the side intake combo. And just a quick note, I mentioned in the M2 review that if you are using an NVIDIA FE card, you really do want to avoid the rear exhaust because of the directional exhaust on those cards. Here, it's totally fine because the card I'm using here doesn't have a significant flow-through section, so you do have a little bit more freedom to choose between those two options I mentioned. So I think either of those would be very good. So if you do want to do this setup, you're going to need to configure on the extra radiator panel like I have here. And the advantage of going with the slightly lower PA120 Mini here is that you can actually fit this radiator panel, which is this is a very nice cooler as well. And I do have a more detailed review of this cooler coming up, so please make sure you're subscribed to get all the updates on that content. Please also give a like if you enjoyed this and found it helpful. I'll be leaving component links down below. And thanks for watching today.